So, it turns out that many people often wonder why Rome is so frequently on our minds. When you look at the numbers alone, it's a bit puzzling. Rome wasn't the biggest empire, nor the oldest, longest-lasting, or even the most innovative. However, the influence of this vaguely defined period still echoes in our modern economies, even hundreds of years later. Maybe it's partly due to chance. Rome mostly ruled over Europe, and eventually gave way to nation-states, many of which still exist today in some form. These nations, through colonialism and industrialization, played a role in shaping what would eventually become the USA, the most economically dominant country in history. Whether the USA acknowledges it or not, it learned a lot from the European nations that initially established a Western presence there. And these European nations, in turn, learned quite a bit from the breakaway states of the Roman Empire, which drew lessons from the empires that preceded it. Ever wonder why the White House and the U.S. Capitol building, the symbols of political power in arguably the most influential country globally, bear a striking resemblance to architecture from 3,000 years ago? It's not just a random coincidence. Being dominant in a region that eventually becomes even more influential is a fantastic way to etch an empire's history into the collective memory, overshadowing others that might, in many ways, be more remarkable. But that's a debate for historians and architects. Our focus here, however, is delving into the economic legacy of this historical lineage. While economists can't predict the future, there are valuable and somewhat disconcerting lessons to be learned from the past. Let's unravel how these historical hand-me-downs have left a lasting impact on our modern world. Beyond its sheer fascination, using ancient Rome as an economic case study can unveil profound insights into our modern world. Surprisingly, even at its peak, Rome's wealth and industrial might were likely on par with countries like Uganda, Bolivia, or Nepal, and that might be a generous estimate. So, what exactly makes the Roman economy so pertinent to our contemporary economic systems? What lessons does it offer economists about the inherent limitations of limitless growth? And if our economies have borrowed extensively from this ancient empire, does it imply a looming repetition of its mistakes? Once we tackle these questions, we can proudly place ancient Rome on the economics explanation leaderboard. Now, before we dive into the nitty-gritty, let's make one thing clear. Discussing the economy of Rome without specifying a time period is like chatting about the USA's economy without clarifying if it's post-Civil War or post-dot-com bubble. The Roman Empire spanned nearly 2,000 years, up until the 1800s in some form or another. But for simplicity's sake, let's focus on around 100 to 200 AD, the empire's peak from a territorial standpoint. Though, truth be told, the specific year might not even matter, because, no matter which one you choose, the economy of Rome was, well, kind of lackluster by today's standards. It might sound surprising, given the usual portrayal of the empire as an all-powerful force basking in wealth and splendor, at least for its elite citizens. The reality is that Rome was primarily an agrarian state with minimal industrial activity, and its economy mirrored that structure. Calculating the total economic output of a country today is challenging enough, even with the advantage of modern record-keeping standards and international organizations committed to thorough research. Imagine the hurdle of determining the GDP of a 2,000-year-old empire with sparse records and no independent oversight, relying on decayed relics for information. Raymond W. Goldsmith, a legendary economist and historian, made one of the best attempts. He estimated that the Roman Empire had a GDP per capita equivalent to around $1,000 to $1,277 in today's money. This places it as a desperately poor economy, well below today's global average, with a majority of its population living in absolute poverty. In total, the collective economic output was around 50 to 60 billion US dollars, making it a relatively small economy. Now, let's talk GDP. Gross domestic product is a measure of how much an economy produces for itself in a given year. There are two general ways to calculate this number: from the production side or the consumption side. Theoretically, you could measure GDP by meticulously recording every final good or service produced, constructed, or performed in an economy. However, this would be an immensely challenging task, given the millions of such events happening daily in any country around the world. Here's the gist. If something of value is produced in an economy, it will be demanded by some economic participant. Even goods produced but not immediately sold are counted as investments by businesses. The rationale is that eventually, these goods could be sold to a consumer, and while waiting to be sold, they count as inventory considered an asset. If something is produced and no one expresses interest in buying it at any price, then it essentially has no value, and its production shouldn't have been accounted for in the first place. Enter total demand, or aggregate demand as some economists say. It's way easier to measure because, in a modern advanced economy, every time someone legally purchases something, there's a record kept for taxation and accounting purposes. Economists can conveniently gather these records to construct economic metrics like GDP. Of course, Raymond W. Goldsmith and other economists attempting to calculate the GDP, total economic output, or aggregate demand of the Roman Empire, didn't have the luxury of modern data points. Yet, they applied similar basic techniques. For instance, by examining records of the average amount of wheat consumed by a Roman citizen, they could estimate output figures for other goods like food, construction projects, and natural resource extraction. Alternatively, they could approach it from the production side, analyzing the average gold mine in the empire and determining its output in adjusted economic terms. The outcome: most Romans lived hand to mouth, and wealth was heavily influenced by the success of each year's harvest. Despite enjoying a relatively higher quality of life compared to many at the time, thanks to some investments in infrastructure and surprisingly advanced agricultural technologies, Romans would still seem considerably less affluent by modern standards, even the elites. This relative poverty prompts an intriguing set of questions, highlighting just how miraculous our modern world is. First off, why was the ancient world economically disadvantaged? To generate economic output, an economy needs the factors of production: land, labor, and capital. We've touched on this quite a bit, so I'll keep it concise. In economics, capital is essentially a fancy term for things that help produce other things. Think of a hammer, a computer, a truck, or even the road network. They're all considered capital. Some economists even include well-protected borders and a robust education system in the capital category because they contribute to an economy's ability to produce goods. Now, producing anything in an economy boosts total economic output, or GDP, but it requires a combination of all three factors of production: land, labor, and capital. For instance, a factory with top-notch workers won't function without a piece of land to stand on. The richest mines need miners to extract resources, and the most fertile farmlands depend on farming equipment and seeds. At the peak of its empire, Rome had a considerable workforce, totaling between 50 and 80 million people who could contribute to the nation's industries. Contrast this with a modern farmer armed with tools like fertilizers, harvesting equipment, and weather mapping. Today, a single farmer can produce enough food for themselves and thousands of others. This efficiency allows the majority of people in modern economies to pursue activities beyond farming, including innovation to enhance overall efficiency. While the Roman Empire did possess more capital than many empires of its time, and some of its tools and infrastructure were impressive, something like the Roman aqueduct, a marvel in engineering at the time, represented a substantial economic investment for the empire. Today, virtually every town in the Western world boasts a water system, a common expectation rather than a marvel. The lack of tools and technology in ancient times also highlights a crucial point about our modern economies. Everyone watching this video is likely economically wealthier than even the most powerful emperors of Rome. At first glance, this might sound like an outrageous statement. However, economic wealth is not just about production. It's also about consumption. While a Roman emperor may have had access to more goods and services requiring land and labor, they had far fewer goods and services dependent on capital, the very things we cherish in the modern world. We enjoy access to foods from around the globe, instant information at our fingertips, transportation that can whisk us almost anywhere on Earth within a day, healthcare capable of turning once life-threatening injuries into minor inconveniences, and everyday conveniences like air conditioning, lighting, and refrigeration that we often take for granted but would have been unimaginable luxuries for Roman emperors. Personal fulfillment extends beyond mere consumption numbers. When comparing the wealth of two vastly different groups, such as a modern global citizen and Roman emperors, economists should consider frameworks like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This hierarchy categorizes goods and services based on their role in fulfilling various human desires, ranging from essential needs for survival to items that contribute to feelings of well-being, importance, or pride. Even when breaking down and examining each level individually, people today fare much better than even the wealthiest individuals from ancient times. While there might be something to be said about the unique self-actualization perks of ruling over a sprawling empire, in terms of tangible economic wealth, we generally surpass the ancient world in many aspects. Consider housing, for instance. While an ancient Roman palace may sound appealing, many today wouldn't trade it for a modern two-bedroom townhouse equipped with electricity, plumbing, and internet access. In essence, our definition of wealth has expanded to encompass not just material possessions, but also the quality of life and access to conveniences that were unimaginable in ancient times. Indeed, statistical correlations, particularly life expectancy, can vividly illustrate the scale of wealth we enjoy today in the Western world. There exists a robust correlation between economic wealth and life expectancy, observed at the individual, national, and even suburban levels within the same city. This correlation is, in a way, almost self-evident, as life itself is arguably the most valuable asset for humans. To put it into perspective, a regular Roman citizen had a life expectancy of around 20 to 30 years, varying based on the specific period and region within the empire. Even accounting for infant mortality, only about 20% of people reached the age of 50. Emperors, being far wealthier, had a better life expectancy, hovering around 50 years according to historians. However, considering factors like deaths on the battlefield or common assassinations, most emperors struggled to reach what we now consider old age. It's important to note that this data doesn't even factor in infant mortality, as babies who died during childbirth or at a very young age wouldn't become emperors. The intriguing question arises: why didn't Rome develop capital? While economists can't predict alternative pasts, they can explore historical circumstances. Why, for instance, did Europe in the 17th century kick off the Industrial Revolution, whereas the larger and in many ways more advanced Roman Empire remained primarily agrarian for thousands of years? In the case of Rome, there wasn't much incentive to advance technologically. With a vast pool of manpower, comprising regular workers and numerous slaves, early iterations of innovations like steam engines were regarded as little more than gimmicks. The structure of Roman society, combined with the abundance of human labor, didn't provide the same incentive for technological breakthroughs that would reshape the world as seen in later centuries. As Europe approached the Industrial Revolution, there was indeed a shortage of manpower, prompting an increased interest in tools that could amplify the productivity of individual workers. The idea of one worker utilizing tools to accomplish more work became a more attractive investment than simply acquiring an additional worker. Luck played its part in history as well. If some Romans had stumbled upon technologies like piston steam engines and showcased their applications, the course of history might have taken a very different turn. Furthermore, technological progress tends to be self-reinforcing. Machines that can replace field laborers mean more people can transition to working in factories. As more individuals gain experience with machinery and factories, this knowledge can be shared and applied to other emerging technologies, such as the printing press. All right, let's break down the Roman Empire's economic standing using estimates from its peak in 100 to 200 AD. In terms of size, the Roman Empire's economy was relatively small, even by the standards of its time. Comparatively, the Han Dynasty in what is now modern-day China likely had a larger overall economy due to more fertile farming in the region, resulting in a larger population. Considering that much of the economic output in this era was determined by the capacity for agricultural production, the Han Dynasty might have had the upper hand. By modern standards, the best estimates suggest that the Roman Empire, with an output equivalent to roughly $50 billion today, would place Rome around the 100th largest economy globally. This puts it in line with countries like Sudan, Jordan, and Uganda. For this category, Rome gets a 5 out of 10. This economic output was distributed across a population of around 50 million people. While exact population counts are elusive, the best estimates indicate a GDP per capita of around $1,000. This would position Rome as one of the poorest countries in the world today, roughly on par with nations like Ethiopia and Rwanda. However, it would still place ahead of places like Somalia and Afghanistan. It's important to note that this isn't necessarily an indication of these places being less economically productive. Rather, their informal industries aren't fully captured in formal economic figures. For this category, Rome gets a 1 out of 10. Stability and confidence in the Roman Empire were acceptable, all things considered. The empire endured in one form or another for a remarkable 2,000 years, but during this time, it faced notorious political power struggles and internal conflicts. Limited by the absence of modern technology, prosperity was contingent on the success of each year's harvest. For these factors, Rome receives a 5 out of 10. However, growth was virtually non-existent, with expansion primarily driven by adding more territories through conquest. The average Roman citizen produced roughly the same economic value at the start of the empire as they did towards the end, resulting in a 0 out of 10 as the empire only lost nominal output from its peak. In terms of industry, Rome had minimal development. Beyond a few specialized tradesmen and elites engaged in science, philosophy, and engineering, the majority of the population spent their lives in farming and subsistence duties. The empire receives a 2 out of 10, largely supported by the building industry, which, while impressive for its time, would be considered unremarkable today. In summary, Rome attains an average score of 2.6 out of 10, placing it at the bottom of the leaderboard. While this assessment might provoke disagreement, judging by modern standards, it's challenging to place it elsewhere. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of the economic legacy of ancient Rome. While the empire may have left an indelible mark on history, its economic standing, when measured by modern standards, falls towards the lower end of the leaderboard. If you found this journey through time intriguing, make sure to subscribe for more insightful content. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed the video, and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, take care and explore the vast landscapes of history with us. Goodbye.